come up here whether she likes it or not. I'm Leslie Huntley. I'm president of NAMI Four Seasons, and I am so happy to welcome this group of people to hear and speak to all of the things that Mr. Early has to tell us. We also have a wonderful group of panel members. Everyone has their program, and I particularly want to thank our sponsors, Pardee Hospital, the Hendersonville Community Fund, Mr. and Mrs. Don Cooper of Cooper Reeves on behalf of Cooper Reeves, and many others, members, businesses, and organizations. Thank you very much. Now I want to introduce the lady responsible for all of this, Adrienne Brady, our treasurer.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm not really accepting responsibility. Well, the day has dawned and we have an audience. I'm amazed. Thank you. I spoke with Mr. Early on Tuesday evening, finalising travel arrangements. He asked me how many people were expected. I said, I hadn't a clue. I really didn't know. That's just what's worrying me. He said, I have spoken before an audience of 5,000 and an audience as small as 20. What matters is that we get the message across. Even if it's only 4 people, we will have achieved something. And thank goodness I see a few more than 20 people. However, I want you to know that I expect you all to get the message. This is just not a one-day affair. We do want to help fund crisis intervention training for more police officers. However, our aim is to begin to create a task force to address just what needs to be done in our local communities in order for the mentally ill to receive fair treatment and real help. There is an evaluation form which you've all been given. I hope you all have it. We would like you to complete that before you leave. And there are 2 questions related to the task force. Please give them your utmost consideration. You've also been given a 6x4 card, which we would like you to jot down any questions that you may have for the panel discussion. After the break, we would like you to, when you take a break, just hand them to our ushers at the door, and the moderator can make some sense of them. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Pete Early, author and mental health advocate extraordinaire.
Good morning. Good morning. I am absolutely thrilled to be here. It's such a beautiful state, and I'm particularly happy to be here at the request of NAMI. You know, as a journalist, as a former reporter for the Washington Post, I thought I needed to be objective. I absolutely would not join or participate in any group because I wanted to be, you know, as objective as possible as I could. As soon as I finished this book, I went out and I joined NAMI. And I did it because I needed NAMI. I needed its programs, family to family, and now I'm a lifetime member, and I always advocate for NAMI. If you're not involved in it and you have a loved one with a mental illness or you have a mental illness, you really should get involved in NAMI. It's working to change and improve our system. So I've come here today, and I am a journalist and I am an author, but I've really come today as a father to share my story with you, to add my face to the many faces of mental illness. And my story begins with a frantic car ride and my son saying these words, "Dad, how would you feel if someone you loved killed himself?" My college-age son Mike and I were racing down Interstate 95 from Manhattan to Fairfax County, Virginia, where I live, when he asked me that question. Mike had been diagnosed a year earlier with a mental illness, bipolar disorder, and a psychiatrist had put him on medication, but my son had stopped taking his pills. And during that frantic 4-hour ride, my son would laugh one minute and begin sobbing the next. And I pleaded with him to take his medication, and he yelled, "Pills are poison! Leave me alone!" We got to the emergency room, and the nurse rolled her eyes while Mike talked about how he was on this secret mission from God and how he hadn't slept for 5 days. He'd been wandering Manhattan. We were taken to a waiting room, which is exactly what we did for the next 4 hours. And finally, my son said, "I had enough, I'm going to leave." I said, hang on. And I raced outside, and I literally grabbed the doctor, and I will never forget how he entered that room. He came in with his hands up as if he was surrendering. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Early, I really can't help your son." I said, "You haven't even examined it." And he explained to me that it didn't matter. Virginia law was very specific. Unless a person posed an imminent danger, either to themselves or someone else, they could not be required to take medication or forced into treatment. And the nurse had told the doctor that my son believed that all pills were poison. So he turned to me and he said, "We're really busy. I don't have time for this. You seem like a nice guy. I'll tell you what, bring your son back after he tries to kill you or he tries to kill himself." Well, I took my son home, and during the next 48 hours, I watched him get sicker and sicker. At one time, he had tinfoil wrapped on his head as he was watching TV because he didn't want the CIA reading his thoughts. He slipped out of my house early one morning. He slipped out. He broke into a stranger's house. Luckily, they were not at home. He broke in to take a bubble bath. It took 5 police officers and an attack dog to get him out of that house. And when they did, they took him to a community mental health center, and they called me. And I raced over, and the policeman stopped me at the door. He said, whoa. Before you go in there, let me give you a little fatherly advice. Even though your son has told us he has a mental illness, he's off his medication, even though we picked him up in a stranger's house taking a bubble bath, unless you go in and you tell the doctors there that your son has threatened to kill you, he will not meet Virginia's imminent danger criteria and will take him to jail, and you don't want that. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, my son hasn't threatened to kill me." And he shrugged and walked away. So I'm here to tell you I do it with no pride because it hurt my relationship with my son. I went in, I lied. I said my son had threatened to kill me, and that was good enough to get him taken to a hospital. And 48 hours later, he voluntarily signed himself in. But our problems were far from over. 24 hours after my son voluntarily admitted himself, I got a call from his doctor. Our insurance company wasn't going to pay. They said he didn't need to be there. Well, I called that insurance company, and I got absolutely nowhere until I happened to mention that I used to work at the Washington Post, and I'm friends with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes, and they should expect a call. Well, journalists are not supposed to use their positions to bully people, but I did, and all of a sudden my son was allowed to stay in that hospital for a record-breaking 14 days. In the short time between our trip from New York to Mike's hospitalization, I had lied to get him in treatment, and I bullied people, using my ethics, violating my ethics to keep him there. And just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. I got a call from the Fairfax County Police. My son was being charged with 2 felonies, breaking and entering and destruction of property. I was so frustrated. I said to my wife, "You know, Virginia law stopped me from getting him help. Now it wants to punish him for a crime he committed when he needed help. I don't know what to do." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, then why don't you do what you do best? Pete Early, a father, can't find out much, but Pete Early, a journalist, can investigate this and try to find out what's going on." Well, for once I actually listened to my wife, and I did a little digging. And I found out that what happened to my son is not some aberration, it's not some freak occurrence. As we sit here today in this beautiful, beautiful facility, there are 360,000 people with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and major depression sitting in jails and prisons. 500,000 are on probation. More than 1 million go through the criminal justice system every year. And as many of you know, the largest public mental facility in the United States today is not a treatment facility. It's the Los Angeles County Jail. And if you think North Carolina doesn't have this problem, think again. According to a recent study, there is a 4-to-1 chance that if you have a mental illness in North Carolina, you're going to end up in jail rather than getting any kind of help. 4-to-1. Those statistics gave me an idea, but before I pursued it, I wanted to talk to Mike. I said, "Look, I'm thinking about writing a book about you." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, who would want to read that?" And I said, "No, I'm going to write about you, but I'm also going to find a jail somewhere far away from Fairfax County because I don't want to risk irritating a judge or a prosecutor. And I'm going to go in that jail, and I'm going to follow people with mental disorders through the system, out onto the street, see what happens to them. Then I'll come back and I'll talk to the correctional officers and the judges and the police and the parents and the consumers and the mental health advocates and try to make sense of this. He said, Dad, if it helps somebody else, tell my story. Well, I started at the LA County Jail, went in there, I lasted 2 days, and when they saw what I was seeing, they got panicked, and they threw me out, saying I was violating HIPAA by being there. I tried Chicago next. They said no, Cook County Jail. I tried Rikers Island, New York next. They said no. I tried Baltimore. They said no. I went to Washington, D.C., supposedly my hometown, and they said, hell no. And I ended up going down to Miami because of a fabulous judge, Judge Steve Fleischman, who said, I want you to see what's happening in our jail. I want you to see how people are being treated. And I want to try to take you there for a second. The 9th floor, C wing, most suicidal inmates are kept. It's a U-shaped cell block. All the cells have plexiglass fronts. The officers walk up and down the center. There are 19 cells there. And when I looked in those cells, I saw terrified, confused, angry men, completely naked in cells that had nothing else in them. And because of a design flaw, the cells were kept cold, bone-chilling cold, but there were no blankets. And because it was an old facility, the water often broke down. And because people were taking medication, they were constantly thirsty. And without water, they drank from the toilets. And when you listened, you could hear the jail sounds. But when you listened closer, you heard the asylum sounds. People screaming at unseen tormentors. And then I heard a thud, thud, thud. And then faster, thud, thud, thud. Then louder, thud, thud, thud. It was one of the inmates rushing forward, smashing his forehead in the plexiglass, splitting it open. I ain't crazy, he screamed. Then stop acting like you are, an unconcerned officer called back. Now I got to know the officers who worked there, and when I did, they told me they called this the forgotten floor, and I assumed they were talking about the inmates. But the truth was they were actually talking about themselves. Not one officer who worked on the 9th floor had received any treatment for working with someone who had a mental illness. And when I got to know them better, every one of the officers told me that they had been assigned to work with the crazies because it was the worst job in the jail. They were troublesome employees, and the bosses sent them there because they wanted them to quit. My tour guide was Dr. Joseph Portier, a fabulous jail psychiatrist with an impossible job. A lot of people think that if you get put in jail, you're going to get help. But we don't help people here. We're a jail. We're not a hospital. I went with Dr. Portier on his morning rounds. That day, there were 92 inmates on the 9th floor. His rounds took us 19 and a half minutes. If you do the math, you'll see we spent 12.7 seconds talking to each of those inmates. Now, during the next 10 months, I shadowed several people through the Miami-Dade system. And the first one I want to talk to you about is Alice Ann Collier, a chronic case of schizophrenia. She would have been somebody who used to be in a state hospital, but now she was back in Miami, where she was homeless, living on the streets of South Beach. She'd been arrested 10 times in the last 4 years, but she'd never gotten any help for her mental illness. And this time, she was in jail because she was walking by a bus stop, and her eyes locked with an elderly woman's eyes, and Alice Ann screamed, "Stop stealing my thoughts!" And she raced over and she shoved the older woman, not hard enough to knock her over, but she shoved her and she ran away. And well-meaning witnesses said, "You should get her arrested. Get her arrested. Get her off the street. She'll get help if you get her arrested." Well, help is not what Alice Ann got. Florida takes its crimes against the elderly very seriously because so many elderly people retire there. They're automatically felonies. And because Alice Ann had shoved 2 other elderly women at bus stops, she was charged under that state's 3 strikes law, which meant that she faced a mandatory, non-negotiable 5 years in prison because she was considered a habitual criminal. She went before the judge, and the judge looked down and said, "Wait a minute, I can't even put this woman on trial. She doesn't understand what's happening, and you have to understand what's happening in our country before you can be put on trial. I'm sending you to the state hospital in Chattahoochee to be made competent for trial." Not treatment, made competent, and there's a difference. Treatment means you get help. That's not what Alice Ann got. Every day she was taken into a room, and she was shown 3 chairs. On one chair was written the word judge. On the next chair was written the word prosecutor, the third one defense attorney, and when Alice Ann could tell her keepers who sat in each chair, she was ruled competent enough to be put on trial, and she was brought back to the judge. And he looked down and went, "What's going on here? I sent this woman away to be made competent. She's not competent. Go back to Chattahoochee." When I found Alice Ann Collier in the Miami-Dade County Jail, she had been traveling between that jail and Chattahoochee 1,151 days, more than 3 years, and she'd never been brought to trial. Now I'm a reporter. I took my little pen and paper, running over to the state prosecutor's office. "Look what I found! Look what I found!" And they told me, with no embarrassment, that they knew exactly what they were doing to Alice Ann Collier. In fact, they planned to keep her on that bus 5 years, which was the state maximum they could keep her without putting her on trial. Why? Because medication didn't seem to help her. She was dangerous, and there was no safe place. There was no safe place, no long-term hospital beds, no treatment facilities, no place in the entire state of Florida where they could send her to get help. So they were keeping her on that bus just to keep her off the streets. Now, she was typical. The kind of people I was dealing with in that jail were not Hannibal Lecter, serial killers, not psychopaths. There were people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and major depression. You know, after my book was published, I was very fortunate I got to testify before Congress. But before I testified, a panel of experts, supposedly the best and the brightest, Johns Hopkins University, National Institutes of Mental Health, testified before me. And they all said exactly the same thing. Severe mental illnesses such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and major depression are illnesses. The heart can get sick, and so can the mind. The truth I've learned is that you can't find a scientist today who can stand up here and tell you what causes bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. You can't do it. The latest thinking is that there is a result of a complex genetic risk plus environmental factors. But the point of all this is it can happen to anyone. It happened to my son. It can happen to you or happen to someone you love. The good news is, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, a large percent of persons can be helped by medication, and an even greater group can be helped if you add in other recovery tools. Now, I want to point out a fact here. I didn't know this when I first started. Medications help control the symptoms. They do not cure the illness. And that's why we have to push for medications that cure the illness and just don't control the symptoms. Consider April Hernandez. She's the same age as my son. She was serving 6 months for stealing a car. And when I investigated her case, I found out she'd been framed. Now, who would frame April Hernandez? Her own parents. Why did they frame her? Because she was living on the streets of South Beach, where she was psychotic, she was homeless, and she'd been gang raped twice and attacked 3 times by teenagers who thought it was hilarious to beat up homeless people on weekends, and there was nothing anyone could do to help her because she was not considered dangerous or a threat to herself or others. And in her mental situation had been masked for years because as teenagers she'd started using drugs, and everybody went, "Oh, that's why she acts erratically." It was only after she was correctly diagnosed as having co-occurring disorders with drug and alcohol that people understood that the underlying problem was a mental illness. And 40% of persons with mental illnesses have co-occurring problems. And in the Miami jail, 90% of the people I was dealing with had alcohol and substance use problems. The last person I want to talk to you about this morning is Freddie Gilbert. And I don't care if you live in Washington, D.C., New York, or in these beautiful mountains around your country. You know a Freddie Gilbert. You have seen a Freddie Gilbert. You have encountered a Freddie Gilbert. A Miami study found that in a population of 2 million at any given time, there were 1,700 people who were living in cars and on the streets. They were homeless. But that same study found that of those 1,700 people, most were able to move through the social system and get some kind of supportive or temporary housing, except 507 people. 507 people. They are the chronic homeless. They're always homeless. They're always on the street. And in Miami, those 507 all have a mental illness. And in Miami, those 507 homeless people with mental illnesses all have been arrested more than once. And Freddie Gilbert was one of these 507 persons. And when I met him in his jail cell, he was so sick he could not speak. He stood naked in his cell, and the officers controlled him by handing him sandwiches as if he were a dog performing for treats. And when I checked his record, I discovered that in the last year alone, he had been in and out of that jail more than 24 times, yet he'd never gotten any kind of help for his mental illness. And that's because he was charged with misdemeanors, and he couldn't be forced into a program even if one had been allowed. How in the world did we get into this situation? Well, we've really come full circle. In colonial times, if you had a mental illness, you had to depend on your family, you were locked in jail, or the sheriff warned you out, which means he took you to the county line, told you to start walking, and told you never come back. In 1843, activist Dorothea Dix visited a Boston jail. She was going there to teach a Bible class, and as she's walking through the jail, she realizes there's one whole cell block that doesn't have any heat, and it's freezing. And she goes to the jailer, and she says, "You can't treat people this way. They're freezing." And the jailer looks at her and goes, "Oh, no, relax. Those are the lunatics. They don't feel the cold like we do. They don't need the heat." Well, Dix spent the next 2 decades talking about how people needed treatment, not punishment, if they had a mental disorder. And she personally persuaded 33 states to begin opening hospitals to help people who were sick. Well, we all know what happened next. In the next 50 years, many of these hospitals turned into giant warehouses, snake pits, underfunded places where people were just locked up and forgotten. One newspaper reporter in my home state of Oklahoma compared the hospitals there in the 1960s to Nazi concentration camps. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy heard the cries for reform, and he called on Congress to set aside $3 billion to open up 2,000 community-based mental health centers. The discovery of a new drug called Thorazine seemed to make it possible to take people out of these locked wards and put them back in the community. Well, what happened? Kennedy was assassinated. The Vietnam War escalated. Congress got ensnarled in Watergate. Thorazine turned out not to be as wonderful as we all thought. Neighborhoods turned out to be not as welcoming as they should be. In short, that $3 billion for community treatment didn't get paid out as planned. Those 2,000 centers didn't get opened on schedule. And next came deinstitutionalization, the closing of these dreaded hospitals, a fabulous idea that turned into a cruel joke. Why? Because state legislators, states started closing down these hospitals overnight, shoving people out the door without having any kind of safety net. And people went outside and marched to substandard apartments, substandard nursing homes, or into jails or prisons, or they were homeless. Now, I was surprised when I investigated the history of deinstitutionalization. I had seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I thought, wow, we should be closing these places down. We need to shut them up. But if you study your history books, you'll find out that the 2 big deinstitutionalization movements in this country were not done for compassion. They were not done for concern. They were done because of money. State legislators were being backed into a corner. There were exposés being written about these hospitals. Civil rights people were filing lawsuits. They said, you can't treat people this way. And the state legislators are going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're going to have to raise taxes. We're going to actually have to put money into these things. This is horrible. And then Uncle Sam came riding in on a white horse and said, no, we're going to save you. We will take care of persons with mental illness. We'll give them Medicaid. We'll give them programs. We'll give them housing, but only if you close down those dreaded state hospitals. And at that point, state administrators went, fantastic, and they began shoving people out the door as quick as they could. Well, the federal government didn't do any better job than the states did when it came to providing community services. In fact, in 1980, we created a perfect storm. How did we do it? We elected Ronald Reagan. And we sent him to Washington. We said, we want you to get Uncle Sam off our back and out of our pockets. You cut that federal spending. And Reagan did. He cut housing alone from $32 billion to $7 billion. He began cutting the very programs which we just said we were going to use to help all those folks with mental illness. Well, it's been 4 decades since deinstitutionalization, 3 decades since the Reagan Revolution, so why are our jails and prisons still filling up with people whose only major crime is they got sick? Well, the biggest reason is, despite millions of dollars and years of programs, we still don't have adequate community mental health services across this nation. Let's return to Miami. Miami, everybody in Miami who has mental illness isn't locked up in jail and prison. There are 4,500 people in Miami who have severe mental illnesses. 4,500 people who used to be locked up in institutions or would have been. Where do they live? They live in 650 boarding homes, assisted living facilities, ALFs they're called. That's great. We got them out of the hospitals. We got them into these houses. But let's take a look at where they are. Of those 650 homes, 400 cannot pass the minimum standard in the state of Florida to operate as a boarding home. They're granted exceptions. In other words, if you tried to put anybody but a person with mental illness into that boarding home, it would not be allowed. One of the ones I visited had a hole in the roof. The rain came through. Medications were scattered on a kitchen table. The caretaker only spoke Spanish. None of the tenants spoke Spanish. Meals were rice and beans. There was no therapy. There was no case management. There was nothing but smoking cigarettes and watching TV. And I would argue in this case we haven't improved these people's lives by taking them out of these dreaded institutions. We're just hiding them better. Now, it's easy to stand up here and rant and rave about these slum operators of ALFs, but let's look at what they have to deal with. The average operator of an ALF, when I did my research in Miami, was they got $29.90 per day for every client they had. $29.90 a day to cover clothing, medication, food, housing, everything. You know, when I travel, I put my dog, and you can tell I'm from Washington, in the Dulles Executive Pet Center, okay? And they charge me $34 to take care of my dog, feed my dog, take my dog on a 15-minute walk, and give my dog medication. In other words, I pay $4 more a day to take care of my dog than what we're paying people in Miami to take care of persons with severe mental illnesses. Well, it's easy to pick on Florida. So let's move this a little further. Let's move it a little closer to my town. I know you folks in North Carolina think you live in heaven. But I'm sorry to tell you this. Heaven is Fairfax County, Virginia. Okay? I'm going to prove it. Suburb of Washington, D.C. The average household income across the United States, household, the amount of money a household makes, is $45,000 a year. In Fairfax County, Virginia, the average household income is $150,000 a year, 3 times the national average. And that's because usually you have 2 wage earners and they both work for the federal government, so thank you very much for your tax dollars, okay? Yet you would think, wow, $150,000 per household, one of the wealthiest counties, they must have fabulous mental health services. Yet there is a 2-week wait to get into a treatment program in Fairfax County, Virginia. There is a 6-month wait to get a case manager, and there is an 18-year wait in Fairfax County, Virginia to get any kind of housing. That's shameful. Is there any reason I call my book crazy? I'm not talking about people like my son. I'm talking about our system. Besides still not having a viable safety net, there are other reasons why jails and prisons are our new asylums. In the 1980s, civil rights attorneys began looking at mental health and they said, wait a minute, you shouldn't get arrested just because you're hearing voices. You shouldn't get arrested just because you have a mental illness. And you shouldn't be thrown in a state hospital and have a doctor come in and stick an ice pick up under your eyelid and scramble the front part of your brain and say, congratulations, you're cured, you can go home. And most of all, and they made no attempt to hide this, they targeted involuntary commitment laws on the idea that they were doing people a favor by keeping them out of these dreaded institutions. And the key language became imminent danger. And having gotten that through the courts, they made sure it was tightly enforced. One judge ruled that a man with chronic schizophrenia who was sleeping under cars at night and eating his own feces was not doing anything dangerous enough to have him committed against his will. I believe that focusing only on dangerousness is foolhardy. I love my son, and I know how we've treated people with mental illnesses in this country. But telling a father to bring your son back after he tries to kill himself or tries to kill someone else shouldn't be done. We have to find a better way to protect civil rights, but also get people who are gravely ill help they need before they become dangerous. There's another reason, HMOs, we thought, wow, they're going to save us all. But by 1997, 2/3 of HMOs are owned by for-profit companies, and psychiatric emergency beds do not make money. They lose money. Every time a hospital hires a psychiatrist, they actually lose money. So hospitals are closing those down. HMOs are closing them down in favor of surgical beds, which are profitable. We have no place to send people who need crisis services. And then, of course, we have our recession, and states are picking on mental health. Why? Because we don't have PAC funds. We don't make large we don't give money to them, okay? And also, because of stigma, we don't have strong voting blocks. So we're easy targets. Well, how are we responding to this crisis? Well, we have managed to change mental health from a health issue into a criminal justice issue. All across our country, communities such as yours are focusing on ways to stop people from being shoved into jails and prisons. One of the best ways is crisis intervention training. I'm a huge proponent of it. You need it. It's fabulous. You have to get the right police officers. Everybody's not cut out to be a CIT officer, by the way. You have to get the right mix, but they are fabulous. And then communities are looking around, they're going, well, look, these CIT officers are getting frustrated because they take people in the emergency room doctors just send them out the door. They want to do something, and so they're going, hey, let's set up a jail diversion program. Let's divert people from hospital into treatment. And let's set up a mental health court. Let's have judges come in who know about mental health, and let's have them hear these cases rather than putting somebody through the normal judicial system. And then people are saying, what about people in jail? Let's identify who has a mental illness, and let's get them in a reentry program. It's silly just to open up the door and send them out. They're going to come right back. Let's get them into treatment. So you have CIT, jail diversion, mental health courts, and reentry. And in the most progressive communities, those programs are helping stop people from being, and most important of all, especially for your politicians to realize, is they're saving money. Look at Bexar County, San Antonio, it's on the internet, how CIT in a crisis center saves that county $1.3 million a year. And politicians need to hear that because they may not care on a moral level, but they will care about politics and money. That's great. But we seem to have forgotten a lesson we should have learned with deinstitutionalization. It's great to divert somebody from jail. It's fabulous. But it only works if you have somewhere to divert them to. If you don't have affordable medication, no critical care crisis beds where people can become stable, no longer-term beds where people who are ill can receive treatment, no assertive community treatment teams, no evidence-based practices that include programs such as peer-to-peer, no housing, no hope for recovery, then those initiatives and the criminal justice side are going to be in their cut. The criminal system did not create the mental health crisis, and we can't count on it to solve it. That's why we got to stop thinking about mental health reform as a criminal justice problem and recognize it for what it is, which is a community problem. Let's use some common sense here. If I broke my leg, I wouldn't call up a police officer and say, will you come fix it? If I had a heart attack, I wouldn't call up a sheriff's officer and say, will you come do open heart surgery? And if I had hemorrhoids, I wouldn't call up my state legislator and say, hey, can you come over and take a look? So why are we depending on police officers and sheriffs and legislators to fix a mental health system? We need to wake up and realize you can't talk about mental health reform unless you want to talk about housing. And you can't talk about mental health reform unless you want to talk about jobs. And you can't talk about mental health reform unless you want to talk about veterans. And you can't talk about it unless you want to talk about transportation. You have to understand that people with mental illnesses need all these services. People say to me, what's the answer? People with mental illness, it's just so tragic. They'll never get any better. And I always respond with one word, bull. And I cut that short for you, okay? People get better. People can recover. Is it really that difficult? What do people with mental illnesses want? A safe place to live, someone to love, and a purpose in their life. That's what I want. That's what you want. You know, since the publication of my book, I've visited 46 states. I've toured over 100 programs. I have seen miracles happen. I found a program in Miami that was doing something that is unbelievable. They were taking people who had committed murders and other serious crimes, who had schizophrenia, supposedly the hardest illness. They were moving them out of jails and prisons back in the community. Now, how in the world is that possible? Well, the program was called Passageway. And because these people were felons, they only took people who reacted well. Their symptoms were controlled by medication. But the doctors worked with them to find the right medication, not the cheapest drug, but the right medication that had the fewest side effects possible. And then the doctors at Passageway did something really revolutionary. They actually talked to their patients. Do you know, of my son's 6 psychiatrists, only 1 has bothered to learn anything besides his name, his diagnosis, and what medications he's on? And that's because we have told doctors today that these are chemical imbalances, and their job is just simply to figure out what drug works best to keep that person stable. That's all they're going to get paid for 15 minutes by the insurance company. They should send them out the door and let cheaper social workers handle the problems. But I'm here to tell you that treating the mind also requires treating the heart, and it depends on more than popping pills. And Passageway. Clients are assigned jobs based on their abilities. Why? Because jobs give you a sense of purpose. They give you a sense of satisfaction. They give you a sense of fulfillment. They participated in group therapy. Why? Because helping others helps you. When they got better, they got excellent case managers. When they got better, they were encouraged to pursue their dreams. They were encouraged to have dreams. And they were encouraged to take control, self-direct of their own treatment. And they were given housing. How in the world can you get better if you're living under a bridge being gang raped at night? And Tom Mullen, the program's director, told me the success of his program. It proved to be amazingly simple. There were 2 ingredients. Number 1, he had created a real asylum. Not a giant warehouse where people were locked up and forgotten, but a community where people genuinely, honestly cared about each other. He called it a parish, where people with mental illnesses were not stigmatized, not isolated, not shunned, but were truly accepted as part of society. And second, and I was very cynical when he first told me this, but I became a believer, he said it was essential to have hope. Medications, jobs, housing, transportation, community acceptance, those are the spokes on a recovery wheel, but hope is the hub. It pulls everything together. And the most successful programs I've seen, the people who are the sickest, the people who are helping them, must, above everything else, have hope. If you want someone to recover, you've got to believe that they can. Now, I'm not being naive here. I've dealt with really, really sick people. I know these are cruel diseases, and I will tell you, I'm not sticking my head in the sand. There are some people who aren't going to get better. But we must cling to the hope that someday they will, because without hope, they never will have a chance. Actor Hal Lindsey said it best, man can live about 40 days without food, about 3 days without water, about 8 minutes without air, but only 1 second without hope. Okay, what can you do? First, you need to educate the public. You need to reach out to that neighbor of yours who doesn't know anything, who was like me, knew nothing about mental illness until it hit his life. You need to tell them that the face of mental illness is not the Virginia Tech shooter. It is not Gerald Laudner in Tucson. It is Mike Wallace. It is Terry Bradshaw. It is Catherine Zeta-Jones. These are the many faces of mental illness. There should be no shame in having a mental disorder, only shame in not helping someone who does. What can you do? Educate your politicians. I mentioned this earlier. We all know there's no new money. Let's start spending the money we have more wisely. Miami, there are 1,200 people in jail there right now. They cost that city $100,000 a day. Those 1,200 people all have severe mental illnesses. They're not getting any better. $36 million a year just to warehouse them, 8 times longer than any other inmates in that jail. For half that, you could give them housing first and an ACT team and actually help them get better. The Freddie Gilberts in your community are not going to go away, and they're not going to get any better. And the average cost of someone with schizophrenia who is homeless roaming your streets is $40,000 a year in services. That's going to get paid whether you like it or not, whether you pay it through treatment, which makes sense, or you pay it through jail and court and other services. The huge waste of money. Jail diversion averages a return to the state of $2.70 for every dollar spent. What can you do? Most of all, my friends, listen here. Never underestimate the power of one person to change an entire community. I have seen it. Fort Wayne, Indiana, a doctor there's son committed suicide by cop. That doctor went to New York. He looked at the Fountain House model, which is a job clubhouse program. He brought that back to Fort Wayne. He changed that entire community. He changed that entire community. One man did that. Margaret Mead said it best when she said, "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever really has." What can you do? Never give up. Never give up. Like all parents, I thought, okay, my son had this one breakdown, but it'll never happen again. We got him on this treatment program. Everything's great. He did his 2 years of probation. He immediately stopped taking his medication. He immediately started fading. He started getting psychosis. I recognized it. I called. We have a Fairfax County mobilization response team. I called. I said, "Please come over. Please come over. My son is off his meds. He needs your help." And the guy on the phone said, "Well, is he dangerous?" I said, "No, he's not dangerous yet, but let me tell you what happened last time." "Oh, we can't judge him on what happened last time. You call us when he gets dangerous." The night my son became violent, the night I didn't have to lie, I called that same man. I said, "My son's violent. Please, please come. We need your help." And he said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Is he dangerous or is he violent?" I said, "He's violent." He said, "Oh, we can't come if they're violent. You call the police." Well, I called the police. And they came over and they shot my son twice with a taser and hogtied him and took him off. Now, there's a reason why I'm telling you that story. If I couldn't get my son help after spending 3 years investigating this system, writing a book, living in fancy-dancy Fairfax, Virginia, with all my political connections, what chance do you think someone in your community has to get help with their mental disorder if they don't know anything about the system? Now, since that day, my son had another break. He was hospitalized. He came back. He again stopped taking his medication. It was Thanksgiving. He knew I recognized something was wrong. He panicked. He jumped in the car. He took off. I called him on his cell phone. He wouldn't answer. Finally he answered, and you're going to like this part. I said to him, "Where are you going? Where are you going? Please come home." He said, "I'm going to Paradise." Well, Paradise turned out to be North Carolina. That's where he ran out of gas. And he called me. And he said, "Dad, I'm out of gas, and the voices are telling me that if I step out of my car, I'm going to die." Now, I had learned by this time that it made no point to argue with him. I knew he wouldn't die if he stepped out of that car. But I'm going to tell you something I learned in Miami. I had a guy tell me, he said, "I've been cut in half by a saw." And I looked at him and went, "Uh-huh." He said, "No, you don't get it. You don't get it. I was walking down the street. All of a sudden, I couldn't move. And I saw this giant buzzsaw coming in, the kind they cut up logs with. It was coming right at me. And I was yelling, 'People, look, look, look.' And everybody was just acting like I was strange. And all of a sudden that saw came and it cut right through me." And I went, "Okay." He said, "How do you know I'm talking to you? How do you folks know you're in this audience? How do I know this podium's here? My brain is telling me that. And I'm telling you, if your brain told you when you walk out of this building a car was about to hit you, you would jump. And if your brain was telling you a buzzsaw was coming, cutting you in half, you'd feel that buzzsaw cutting you in half." That's the condition my son was in. I said, "I'll come." He says, "Don't come. I don't want you to come. Just give me gas." So I called AAA. I got him gas. And I promised I would not call the police. And I waited until our cell phone batteries ran out with my son, psychotic, driving up 95, going off the road twice. And he showed up at my house. He would not take medication. I convinced him to go into a safe house. And he went there just to get some rest for the night, to think about things, to get a clear head. In the middle of the night, he got up. He took off all his clothes because he was sure that made him invisible. And he walked outside. But listen what happened this time. A CIT, I couldn't have scripted this better, a CIT officer picked up my son. And he took him to the emergency room, the same hospital that we had been 2 years before. And when the doctor there said he's not dangerous walking around the streets of Fairfax naked, that CIT officer said, "I think you live in Reston. I'm going to drop him off on your front lawn." I don't recommend that, but it worked. My son was admitted. He got a case manager. That case manager got my son into housing. That case manager got my son into a treatment program. That case manager got my son to go to peer-to-peer certified training. Today, my son has been stable for 4 years. He works for Fairfax County as a paid peer-to-peer specialist goes into jails, talks to people with mental illness about how they can get better. You've been very polite. I'm going to end my speech now because I'm from Washington. I have to give you a warning. I want to be politically correct. I'm about to tell a religious story. I'm not promoting religion. I'm not saying you shouldn't be religious. I just like the story, okay? I like it because the imagery it projects. I grew up in Oklahoma. My dad was a small town minister, and that meant every Wednesday and every Saturday and every Sunday I got dragged to church. And I got real good sitting there like this, looking like I was paying attention, not listening to one word he said. But there was always one story he told that snapped me to attention, and that's because I was a teenager, and the story is about a woman having sex. They're in the Bible. You just got to know where to look for them, okay? A woman is caught in adultery. Notice it's always the women in the Bible caught in adultery. And she's dragged down the center of the community. People gather around. They're picking up stones. They're going to kill her because she's done this horrible, horrible thing. They're going to stone her to death. And the teacher says, "Let ye who's never sinned cast that first stone." And we're told that the people put down the stones one by one because they all recognize none of us are pure, none of us are innocent, all of us have sinned. Sadly, today we live in a world where people don't put down those rocks, they don't put down those stones, they don't drop them. They want people who are different, people who have drug problems and alcohol problems and mental health problems. They want to lock them up, they want to drive them away, they want to get rid of them, they want to get them out of their towns and communities. As people who have shown up here today, I believe you're called on to become what I call stone catchers, people who stand between that angry mob and people who can't defend themselves, and you protect them until those people can protect themselves. And it's the stone catchers in our society who give me hope. My son has a mental illness. To me, this awful illness wears his face. And I will be forever grateful to people such as you who can look beyond the madness in his eyes and see a human being of worth with parents and brothers and sisters who love him. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for caring about this problem. Thank you for becoming a stone catcher. I can guarantee you, you get involved in NAMI, you get involved in your community, you get involved in fixing the mental health system, and you will save someone's life. Thank you.
Break, and there's some food outside, and I hope Peter's given you some food for thought. And then after that we will have our panel discussion. Greta Bird is going to be our moderator, and if you have made any notes on your little 6x4 cards, please hand them to Greta. Greta, where are you? Okay, she's up front here. So if you'd like to hand those cards to Greta and she can review them while we're having the break. Please don't leave though, just have some food and come.
In a different way than how North Carolina is handling them as we speak, is going to be cost effective in the long run. So I'm hearing a bunch of good things about, I guess, becoming a special interest group, which is fine. That's our constitutional right, by the way, to do. But when there's a good argument to be made, it seems to me, don't pass up that argument that although it's expensive in the short term, it's probably cost effective in the long term. And by that I mean it probably saves taxpayer dollars tremendously to deal with this issue in the correct way, like some other states apparently are, rather than in a piecemeal way as we seem to be. I'm real conscious about who is going to pay the bill and whether the resources are going to be used to the maximum efficiency that they can be. And that is not being done in North Carolina right now. But I think if it was done, we can show that it's less expensive in the long run to do some of the things that we would like to get done in this
Amen.
room.
You can look on the internet, look for the Perryman Group out of Texas. It's a study that was done a few years ago about the Texas mental health facilities, and it will show how much money is saved by treating people, how much loss is made by our current system. It's called the Perryman Study, Perryman Group, Texas. You can talk to Rusty Seelix in California, who is out in their program, and they did the first cost study that showed that long-term, they even had it broken down to years, treatment will save your community money rather than this repetitive frequent flyer thing we're doing right now.
With our jail diversion program in Buncombe County, we know that we reduce arrests for people who come through the program. We looked at, for the people who came through our program the last 6 months of 2010, comparing their arrests 6 months prior and 6 months after, we reduced it at least 1 arrest. And you know, that's your average. We had people who had 8 fewer arrests, you know, and we have no time limit. Some of those people, we only dealt with them for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Some of them we had for 8 months or a year. But regardless, if we worked with them, if we touched them in the system, that was 1 less arrest, and that's an average of 9 days spent in our jail. So it makes a difference.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
I'm Tom Smith, MD, a psychiatrist. I've been at it almost 57 years. I think an enormous gratitude is due to NAMI Four Seasons and to Mr. Peter Early for really superb presentation here. We need more of these folks. We really do, because we need to get people aroused to a crisis. And I'll try to be brief here. I know it's late. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, not to boost my ego. I'm a humble man, but in order maybe to boost my credibility. I've had, the good Lord bless me, I've been able to maintain the highest grade point average right through medical school, every course I've ever taken. And I tried to use that to other people's advantage to the maximum extent that I could. As a result, I probably slept less than any 84-year-old person that you could find anywhere. But anyway, folks, this is a great mission to try to help these people. And we all know that the mentally ill come at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to funding, attention, all the other things that go with it as far as getting treatment. And we need to band together. We need to get all these patients, their relatives, their well-wishers, registered to vote. They are eligible for a vote if they're not too totally disabled, unless they have been adjudicated mentally incompetent. And everybody that's of age and a legal citizen is entitled under the Constitution to a vote. Let me, for whatever it's worth, I have treated patients from every state in the Union except Hawaii. I've been to Hawaii, but I haven't treated it right there. And I was up in Washington, D.C. for about 4 years, and I treated as many people from Congress. And a lot of folks say I should have stayed on. I missed a few up there. But anyway.
Dr. Smith, we're running out of time, and we'd like to get the last person's question in, if you don't mind. Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Sandy Goebel, and I live in Transylvania County. I have bipolar disorder from 1966, not diagnosed then, but it's very stable, but I'm going to get to my point. It's about money. I have a very chaotic thing going on, migraine headaches, and Mr. Pete, you were just right in my line, and I'm doing this. I probably slept 2 hours last night, and that's not enough, but it all comes down to the fact that I've had 40 migraines since August 1st. And in the last couple of days, I presented a legitimate prescription written by a licensed MD to a licensed pharmacist. And I was turned down because somebody somewhere sitting in front of a computer says, I can't have that. So here I am. I have a headache right now that started at 5 a.m. and I don't know when it's going to stop. And so anyway, I've never been in jail, I've never been arrested, but there are those like me that have to make do, I guess. Money talks.
Well, that's
And
why
that's
you should
fine.
that's why you should get involved in NAMI. NAMI was a
I am.
yeah.
Yeah, I got
for
a real
everybody.
big mouth. I've written a book. It's
Yeah.
not as good as yours,
Well-
but I'm written. No, I read yours.
No, but I mean
Years
that
ago.
NAMI got parity passed, and
Right.
now you got to be active to make sure that keeps going
Right,
passed. you know.
right. But somebody keeps saying, you can't have the migraine-specific medicine that you need because we just don't want you to have it.
Thank you.
So,
And thank you for your last comments and questions. We have run out of time, so we want to thank our panel. But before we say goodbye this afternoon, I'd like to turn the podium over to NAMI.
Hello, everybody. I can't tell you how much I appreciate every single one of you people sitting out there today. Every single one of you has got an interest. And I have to say that this panel is absolutely superb. And you probably... We've all learned a lot, but I feel one way. You may not join me, but you better, because we've got our marching orders. Okay? We know what we need to do. So get up and get going. Okay. I'd like to recognize a person who is here today. He is one of our legislators. Mr. Chuck McGrady is our representative here from North Carolina to the state. And Chuck, would you stand up and let us give you a hand for being here? The next thing I'd like to do is to thank Greta for being moderator here today. She's done a great job, don't you think? Please fill out the evaluation forms. Those are important to us. That's part of your marching orders. Okay? Because we've got to have something to read and something to evaluate ourselves, or we can't operate this task force that we're trying to get going here to find out what it is that we can do right here and now and get some changes going. We've got a long list, haven't we? We've heard about every single one of them, I think, today, and I'll bet you we aren't even half through what we will come up with. Okay, and then next, we're going to start our raffle. Have you all bought your tickets? I didn't hear anything. Okay, we've got raffle tickets and we've got some super gifts, and we are going to ask our panel to draw the tickets so that nobody is feeling like they have been ripped off or whatever. Anyway, and after the raffle, stay in the auditorium for the raffle. If your number is chosen, you can come forward and receive your gift. And then after that, you may exit to the reception area out in the lobby where Mr. Pete Early will be signing his book, and you got an opportunity to...
I think we got 3 or 4 out there.
Well, but we can take orders.
Okay.
All right.
What do you want to do?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think every single one of us needs to have a copy of that book and read it more than once, and then you probably say, oh my God, they're writing about me. So, anyway, I want to thank everybody again for being here. I think it has been a tremendous success. I know every single one of us has learned a lot. And thank you all again for being here.
Putting together the pieces, and so that's October 16th at 4 o'clock at Trinity Presbyterian Church. All right, I've got the first raffle ticket that we drew. It's the last 3 numbers are 073, and it's Josephine, I think? Jacqueline? Okay.
Well, come forward and collect. You've got the certificate to the Grove Park Inn.
Grove Park Inn certificate.
Enjoy.
developmental disabilities is vital to their success. Currently, an estimated 800 children are benefiting from early intervention in North Carolina. My son, Aiden, 4, is a success story thanks to early intervention he has received through programs with government funding. My family started our journey with developmental disabilities in June 2008. Aiden was 18 months old when I took him for a regular well-check visit. His doctor voiced her concerns that Aiden was not where he should be by his age developmentally, and that he was not responding to our voice cues when saying his name. His doctor suggests that we have him evaluated through Child Development Services Agency. Aiden was evaluated, and it was decided that he would be red flagged for the possibility of autism and that he had sensory processing disorder. We decided that Aiden would immediately start therapy, speech, developmental, and occupation through CDSA weekly. Within 6 months of therapy, Aiden was reaching a majority of his goals. He was using phrases instead of one word. He was making eye contact when encouraged, and was well on his way to meeting a lot of the developmental goals that he had set forth. When Aiden turned 3, he was evaluated by the Wake County Preschool Services. It was determined then that Aiden did indeed have high-functioning autism. He was placed in a full-day preschool program within the public school system in a class with other children who have autism. And we saw exceptional progress. Aiden's speech, communication, behavior, and transition skills were just phenomenal. Aiden is currently in a 2.5-hour program in another preschool class within the public school system. He continues to make strides with his transition, social, and behavior, but there are still more goals for him to reach. It's not always easy, but he is trying, and I have all of his therapists, doctors, coordinators, and teachers to thank for where he is now. Aiden will be mainstreamed into a typical classroom environment in August of 2012. Aiden's inclusion in a typical classroom setting would not have happened had he not received the early intervention that he received. I am asking you to carefully examine budget cuts to early intervention for special education. With early intervention, we can not only help so many children with their developmental disabilities, but also help prevent the need for more government funding to be focused on the individual later on in life. Thank you so much for your time and listening to me today. I will be contacting your office to assist you with any more information about early intervention and discuss what we can do to prevent budget cuts. Thank you for your time.
We didn't have Andrea with us.
So sorry.
I am Corey Kick from Craven County. It has been said that the test of a morality of a society is what it does for its children. Thank you for listening today on behalf of North Carolina's children. I am here today to propose an idea that will make public education more meaningful and effective for our children. My son Brandon was born with cerebral palsy. Today he is 13 years old and attends our public middle school like most teenagers. Brandon loves life, and most of the time life loves him back. Till this past February when I received a phone call from his school that stopped my heart. A student in Brandon's class had tried to stab him repeatedly with scissors. Brandon could not get up and move safely because of his speech disability. He could not call for help or even alert anyone that he was in danger. For some unknown reason, this student just started to stab at my son with a pair of scissors. Of course, we demanded that these two boys no longer be in the same classroom. However, the middle school in our district only offers one inclusion class with inappropriate supports for the entire 7th grade. This may be the least expensive alternative, but it is not the safest. I am also a 4th grade teacher in an inclusion classroom. Similarly to my son's situation, I'm given a class where over a quarter of the students have a variety of disabilities. I'm given part-time assistants to teach these children for the full day. I have little or no staff development. For example, this year I'm teaching a student who's visually impaired who reads Braille. I do not read or write Braille. He will be given a part-time teacher for visually impaired students on certain days of the week only. Many times, due to budget constraints, an unnatural proportion of students with disabilities are forced together in an overcrowded classroom. This is not developmentally appropriate and does not provide a meaningful learning environment for students. I ask you to support specific legislation and policy changes to eliminate unnatural proportions between students with disabilities and those without in inclusion classrooms. This can be done by providing the necessary guidelines to be followed by school districts in designing inclusion classrooms. This would benefit all students because often when we design something for those with disabilities in mind, we make it better for everyone. So I ask you to support this policy change on behalf of my son Brandon and all children in North Carolina. I will be following up with you to discuss sponsoring my idea. Thank you for your time to hear my story.
Thank you, legislators, for serving your country by being here today. And I feel blessed that our paths have crossed. This is a photo with my daughter. My name is Heidi Dorf, and I am from Buncombe County. I'll be talking to you today about natural proportions, and all means all. Natural proportions means the makeup of the community that you live in is the makeup of the classroom that the kids go to school in. It's as simple as that, and that occurs in every classroom, in every school building, in every district, in every state, in our country. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, one nation under God,
with liberty
indivisible,
and justice for all.
Thank you. Liberty and justice for all. Bhakti, my daughter, she's 10 years old, and she loves Mr. Rogers, and she is the light of my life and lights up a room with her smile. She brings, she's just like any other child, with a 10-year-old child, and she lights up, she brings diversity to other kids her age with a disability called cerebral palsy. And so let's see. IDEA, as many of you may know, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. If it's going to be implemented, probably would work really well for my daughter. She's been educated since she was 3 years old, 3 to 10, under IDEA with an IEP, an Individual Education Plan. This plan did not work. It's not because IDEA doesn't work. It's a good law.
May I interrupt? Do you have documentation that you're going to be leaving with us with a little more about your family story as well as what you're interested in this legislative panel to address?
If not, I will be sending out information afterwards.
Well, then, thank you very much. You can leave your telephone information with the aide, and we will be looking forward to your telephone call. We appreciate your time, though.
Did I get cut off?
Yes.
Yeah. But the gong, but I was asked a question.
That's the
What?
gong.
Oh, is that a gong too?
I'm confused. I did not finish my testimony, but thank you for coming, and I hope you got something out of it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Harpootland, and I am from Mecklenburg County. I want to thank you legislator members for coming today because I want you to listen to my testimony as it refers to nonprofit organizations, also known as 501c3s. The one nonprofit organization I'm going to be focusing on is Canine Seizure Assist Society, also referred to as CSAS. Canine Seizure Assist Society has helped me become independent because with their help, they helped me go out and find a dog and train her. Her name is Precious. 2 years of training, she has learned how to roll me over when I'm having a seizure, dial the phone, and stay with me. She is my friend and also my independence. So what I'm asking for you today is to consider keeping the nonprofit organizations going and the funding for organizations like this so someone else can have the same independence and success that I have. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you may ask.
I have a question. Are you asking the General Assembly and the taxpayers to fund nonprofits?
No, just to continue the support of creative opportunities like this. Any other questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kathy Dozier, and I'm from Mecklenburg County. Time is valuable to everyone, and I appreciate you sharing your time with me today. I'm here to talk to you about an untapped resource of young people, young North Carolinians who need to work. A job opportunity for economic self-sufficiency and to promote greater community integration of a population often confined to the sidelines of society. The ARC, or the Association of Retarded Citizens, National Fines Report of 2011 states 85% families report a family member with intellectual developmental disabilities are not employed, either part-time or full-time. 52% of these unemployed are unable to get the job training or assistance that they need to find and keep a job. 1 of 5 report someone in the family needed to quit their job to stay home to support their family members' needs. I am one of those 20%. My youngest son, Matthew, is 23 years old. He's an avid movie collector, a computer geek, and an animal lover. Currently, he is training his Labrador puppy, Lucy, to be his assistance dog. Matthew volunteers 1 time a week at a project to heal in Waxhaw, which is in Union County. He cleans kennels, exercises dogs, and gets a lesson in training Lucy. Matthew has Down syndrome and a sleep hypopnea, which is a form of apnea. The goal for Lucy is to help Matthew keep his ventilator mask on at night, and when he takes it off, for Lucy to alert me that he has done such. Matthew spent 17 years in the North Carolina school system. He aged out with a certificate of completion in May of 2010. Yes, the school bus quit coming And by September, Matthew had a mental breakdown. One morning, Matthew looked with tears welling in his eyes, and he said, "What now, Mom? What's next?" I hugged him and said, "I don't know, son. We'll figure it out." Ladies and gentlemen, what can I tell my son? Time in high school needs to be time of career exploration as well as education. The actual doing of jobs will give kids tools for a solid start in life. Please support the Department of Public Instruction's efforts to bring vocational technical training into the high school for this growing number of students. We need to give them the dignity associated with being productive and contributing members of society. I am offering to become a credible source of information to your office going forward on any legislative issue that will impact my son or other individuals with disabilities. And I'll be leaving some paperwork for you.
I have a question. Ms.
Yes, sir.
Does Matthew receive any vocational services currently?
No.
Like a job coach or anything like that? Is he eligible for those type of services? Do they have those in
our
county?
efforts in that regard.
Does Matthew have a case manager?
He does have a case manager.
Well, maybe
He's a
you should
Kappa
get
Mar
your case
recipient.
manager to look into both rehab services in Mecklenburg County.
Yes. He's not been successful to this point with day support programs and things of that nature. They haven't had things that are meaningful for him to do and encourage him to
Day
go.
support program, I'm not sure what that is because I thought those were closed down.
Day support programs, well, in my opinion, they're day-wasting programs, but you know, they're child care. It's child care. If it weren't for the disabled community, I think a lot of people in our communities wouldn't have volunteers. It's not active employment. And, you know, when you take a van load of individuals with developmental disabilities and put them in a van, and you take one Meals on Wheels route, then one individual gets to deliver one meal and the rest of it's a fancy van ride. That's what they call day support in North Carolina. And you know, it's not something that I could encourage my son to do. And after a month or two, he balked and absolutely refused to go. And it got to be a physical issue. And so we need to find something that encourages Matthew. Project to Heal has been the only thing that he has been able to enjoy and don't have to encourage him to go. So there's enough to make a choice, but we've just not found his major interest.
Wants to work.
And he does want to work. And I think it's important that all people with disabilities have some kind of work because of the integration into society and the value of that for them as well as their coworkers.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Judy Pope from Caldwell County. Thank you for hearing me today. I would like to talk to you about allowing our children to reach their full potential by fully funding their education. When I hand my children over to a teacher, I'm doing so with the faith that this teacher is highly qualified and motivated to understand my child. I have 2 children. Both are supported by inclusive classrooms. My daughter, who is hearing impaired, has very little problems with her classes with a small accommodation. My son, on the other hand, has Tourette's syndrome, ADHD, and Asperger's syndrome. He has a lot of issues with school, and he needs a teacher who is patient, understanding, and willing to learn what Tourette's syndrome and Asperger's syndrome are and how they affect the individual. As a mother, I am concerned that with recent cuts to education, that not only my child, but many children are going to fall through the cracks due to teachers being frustrated, overworked, and underpaid. I have spoken with the staff at my children's school, and I know that the principal fears that this will be the first year he can't provide a quality education to every child in his school, and that a younger teacher in the school is considering taking her services away from the public sector. As a mother, I want assurances that my children will be given every opportunity to succeed in life. And I think we can all agree that the inclusive classroom is much better than the segregated classrooms of the past. Inclusion will not succeed, however, if education isn't properly funded. My family knows firsthand how important a highly motivated teacher can be. When my son began his second first grade year, he was unable to read and had a diagnosis of Tourette's syndrome. His teacher took the opportunity to contact the Tourette's Syndrome Association of America and get information on how to better educate a child with Tourette's syndrome. With a few simple changes to her lesson plan and teaching style, she continued her classes as normal. 2 months into the school year, as we were driving down the road, my son pointed to a sign and said, "Mommy, that says holiday." This was the first word my son ever read, and I waited 8 years to hear him do that. I would have had to wait much longer had it not been for the efforts of this teacher. I implore you to find a means to support public education. It is imperative to our state that our children receive the best education possible if we are to compete in a global market. I have made an appointment with your staff to discuss this further, and I do appreciate your efforts to support our children. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Dezo from Pender County. I would like to speak with you today about some assistive technology that we found accidentally, actually, that works with my son. I had 3 wonderful sons. We have Curtis, who is 17, Will, who is 12, and James, who is our miracle. He's 18 months. Unexpected miracle. Will, at the age of 5, was diagnosed with high-functioning autism. He does not learn the way typical students learn. A teacher standing in front of him, writing on a chalkboard, talking, a book in front of him. He doesn't get it. He's not going to get it. We came across an iPad that had educational programs installed on it, downloaded on it. Suddenly, after playing with it, he could read road signs. He could read a menu. He went with me to the grocery store, and he said, "Mom, how long are we going to be?" I said, "About $20 worth." And he said, "Okay." Well, I put 3 or 4 items in the cart, and he looked at me and he said, "Okay, we're done." And I said, "But I've got more." He said, "But you've got $20 worth in there." He said, "Probably more if you count tax." Okay, I'm in trouble now. But then my 17-year-old picked up the iPad. He said, "Mom, it's got calculus on it." He's getting ready to take calculus. He said, "This is great." So this is a device that children with developmental disabilities, as well as children without developmental disabilities, can exceed, and it can help them in their learning experience. So there is information that I've gathered that I will get to your offices next week, and hopefully it will give you some insight on what these particular items can do for our school system. Thank you very much for your time.
Ms. Desiree, I do have a question about assistive technology. The item that you're referencing, is that covered under IDEA? I mean, is assistive technology, is that something that could be placed in someone's IEP? Is the school system covers it? I'm just wondering.
That I haven't inquired on because actually I didn't know a whole lot about it until we just recently picked it up. And it just amazed me at how well he could interact with it and learn so quickly, where in all these years at school, teachers have just been frustrated with it. So with this device, he was learning.
Rhonda, is there any difference between the wave of this device coming into school systems now than we had 10 or 15 years ago when it was computers? We've got to get all of our school systems computers, and now the technology, just like for the rest of us on our cell phones, is rising to the top. You know, computers are going away, and iPads and notebooks and all of those are coming through?
Well, the biggest thing with the iPads and the tablets and stuff are touch.
Uh-huh.
So it's hand-eye coordination, and they're involved in what they're doing. Where on a computer, you're using a keyboard. Well, Will doesn't like a keyboard. So this was awesome because he saw it, he could touch it, he could do it, and he saw what he was doing was making a difference.
But is it really a special need as opposed to a universal need that as computers start leaving our school systems, these iPads and notebooks are going to start generating them in, and ultimately all you need in your county is to ensure that your system upgrades just a little sooner than others.
It's a possibility.
So it sounds like a county issue, but we're glad that you raised that with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
She said it sounds like a county problem. The people I was talking to today said it's Buncombe County. It's your fault.
Good afternoon. I am Stephen Genovese and I live in Craven County. I am 25 years old and I have Asperger's disorder, a form of autism. I know your time is valuable and I thank you for listening. I would like to talk about handicap facilities in public places. During partners and policy making sessions, I have become aware, through talking with other participants who are wheelchair bound, that all restrooms are not equal in accessibility. As a result, I went around New Bern and visited 8 government buildings, 2 banks, 2 churches, 3 supermarkets, 5 large stores, 3 pharmacies, 2 historical buildings, and 5 restaurants. Accessible handicap restrooms range from none to excellent. Most restrooms are at the back of the building. The stalls for handicapped people are farthest from the door, and some are not wheelchair accessible. Some entrance doors are hard to open. City Hall is not accessible due to age. The Tryon Palace History and Education Museum is new and has excellent handicap facilities. I think that future buildings should be built with a separate restroom that is handicap accessible for both men and women in wheelchairs. This should become a part of new legislation that would make it mandatory for this type of restroom in all public buildings. I would like to thank you for your patience and listening to me.
I have a question. I admire your grassroots efforts and going out and checking in your own local area accessibility issues. I'm just curious, what is this partners in policy thing that you're a part of? Because I've had a lot of those folks come through here recently, and I don't know anything about it.
I think it's just learn how to be good activists for people with disabilities and to try and teach people that there are things that can be done. I think there should be changes made.
Do you know if there's another advocacy agency or group in North Carolina that looks out for accessibility concerns or issues?
No, sir, I don't.
I know two. I know two. Disability Rights North Carolina and the Arc of North Carolina.
I wanted to add one more thing as you guys transition, and I'm so glad that you raised just the very simplistic issue of accessibility. Whoever the next person is needs to go ahead and start coming in the area. But the universal design, I don't want to say the Department of Universal Design because that's not what they are. It's an agency or an organization of universal design. But ultimately what does need to happen is that the standards for new buildings, right now the standard for ADA accommodations is not enough. Those standards need to be raised, and the Organization for Universal Design has been trying to get that bumped up within our legislature for many years. And that's something that we all need to be cognizant of in our counties, in our local areas, but across the state, that the requirements for meeting the ADA needs for accessibility, physical accessibility of buildings and public ways, and et cetera, needs to be raised. So, thank you again for your testimony. Can you hear my heartbeat? Boom, boom, boom.
I'm Donna Beckman from Durham County. Thank you very much for being here today. I'd like to be at the beach right now, so I really appreciate your being here this afternoon. Today I'd like to tell you about my son, Thomas. It was 2 days before Thomas was born that I found out he had a heart defect and he might have Down syndrome. I delivered Thomas by a C-section, and after I got a brief glimpse of him, they whisked him away to the intensive care nursery. Doctors continued to inform my husband and me what was acutely wrong with Thomas and the treatment he was receiving. Then Dr. Kopecki came in. I don't think I will ever forget him. He started talking when I stopped him. I said, we were told Thomas had a heart defect and he might have Down syndrome. But what you're saying is that Thomas has Down syndrome and everything else that's wrong with him is because of the Down syndrome. He said, yes, that is correct. Well, even though it had only been a couple of days, I knew you could fix a heart. You can't fix Down syndrome. I don't know about you, but 11 years ago, I didn't know anything about Down syndrome. We had a family friend that I grew up with, Teresa. She had Down syndrome. She had what back in the 70s was referred to as mental retardation. Today, we call it an intellectual disability. However, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Individuals with Down syndrome have birth defects. They are more susceptible to chronic illnesses and diseases, and they have developmental delays. And these developmental delays run across the board and affect many areas that impede progress all throughout an individual's life, whether it's tying their shoes or managing their money. You see, that is why I really enjoy our time at the beach. When we're at the beach, I still have to do laundry and feed my kids, but there are no echocardiograms. There's no speech therapy. There's no meetings to attend to ensure my son is receiving his free and appropriate public education. You see, when we're at the beach, I imagine that's what it would be like if we were a typical family. Sometimes I just want to be a mom, working on my tan and playing in the surf with my kids. I don't want to be a lobbyist or an advocate or a fundraiser or therapist, just a mom. However, this mom cannot abandon civilization for a remote beach somewhere because I have a son with Down syndrome. And although this is the 21st century and families stopped institutionalizing their children decades ago, society and government has not kept up. That is why I'm here today to remind you that when you appropriate funds and create regulations that affect individuals with developmental disabilities, you are either assisting our community in realizing a more typical life, or you are creating further obstacles and challenges for me and my loved ones. I hope that you continue to remember Thomas and become part of the solution and not be part of the problem. Therefore, I've prepared a white paper and have scheduled an appointment with your aide to discuss opportunities where I can assist your team as a reliable, credible source of information as you continue to positively affect the lives of individuals with developmental disabilities in the